Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I will be going through 5 books that gave me the Eeebee Jeebies. So I am still relatively new to thrillers and especially very new to horror. Just in this last year, I started reading a few from that genre here and there. So my list isn't super broad, but I do have a few books that I have read over the past year or two that definitely have stuck with me because of the creepy feelings that they gave me. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right into book 1, which is The Whisper Man by Alexis Hall. This is a book that I read on audiobook just a little while ago, and it is a kind of horror thriller story that follows 4 characters. We have a father and a son who move to a new town after the sudden and unexpected death of their mother/wife, and they're looking for a new start. They move into a house on the son's recommendation, and they feel like this could be a new home, but they also feel like there's something just a little bit creepy about it. We also follow the point of view of 2 detectives. One is a detective that had found the killer of 7 children 20 years ago, and the other is a detective that is put on the case after a young boy disappears. So shortly after the son and father duo move into town, the body of that disappeared boy reappears, and it appears that he has been killed. 20 years ago, part of the murder of these children was that they supposedly heard whispers outside of their window before they were kidnapped. And after talking to the now dead child's parents, they found out that he may have heard the same. So we're dealing with a situation where the detectives are trying to figure out if there is a copycat of this serial killer from years ago, or if he had a partner, which had been suspected back in the day. And of course, the next victim of this copycat partner serial killer is the young boy Jack that we're following. I think it's Jack, either that or it's Jake. But either way, he starts hearing somebody whispering to him, and he is, of course, dealing with the grief of his mother, and so is his father. And this killer of children preys on children that seem to be neglected by their parents. Jake's father, loves him very much, but he was never the primary parent, so this is a very new role for him to be thrown into. But when his son unfortunately disappears, his fatherly instincts really kick in. It was really scary to see from the young boy's point of view, seeing him being kidnapped. We also got to see the point of view of the father of losing his son and doing everything that he can, desperately trying to find him again. And of course, we see things from the point of view of the detectives as well, so we get all those grimy backstage kind of views, the things that are, even too gruesome to share with the public. So I thought it was a really scary story. It made me really nervous. I thought the beginning was a little bit slow, but once things picked up, it was really engrossing. And it is also one of those books that had a ending, like a final sentence of the book that really sticks with you. It really creeped me out, the ending. I was like, that is kind of a horrifying ending to a degree, but also a really fitting ending as well. So it's a book I highly recommend. I listened to the audiobook, and I thought that was a really fun and creepy experience. The next book I want to talk about is also another book that I read. I think both of these I've read last month, so they're very recent reads. But that is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is kind of a sci-fi horror story. It's really short, but we follow a group of characters who are entering a area called Area X. We are following it from the point of view of one of our characters. I believe she is the biologist. And as they enter Area X, they are there to kind of explore the land and also to kind of see what happened to the previous expeditions that went in and never returned. This is a group of only females. In the past, they had sent only men, but since they never returned, they decided to switch things up a little bit. So the story is very different from that in the movie. I personally watched the movie first and really loved it, and that's what made me pick up the book. But luckily, a lot of people warned me that it's very different, so I didn't go in expecting one thing and being disappointed. But I thought it was really creepy and interesting just watching all these unusual things happening to the nature around them and even to the people. There's also aspects of not knowing who in the party you can trust. The members of the party are traveling with a psychologist, and they have agreed to allow the psychologist to hypnotize them while they walked into Area X, but it seems that the psychologist may be using hypnosis against them, even in situations where you would want full control over the decisions that you're making. So it's very much a you don't know who you can trust, and everyone else around you doesn't really trust you either. This is one of those stories where while I was reading it, sometimes when I heard like a noise over my shoulder, I was like, what is that? It just, especially when I was reading outside, it really makes you kind of nervous about all the unusual and strange things that can occur in nature. We also have the creepy aspect of what happened to the previous expeditions there, and do some of the creatures that live here appear to have human-like features? Were they human at some point, and did the land around them change them and trap them here? So it was really interesting, and while we're following our character, she very much seems to a degree to be gaining more and more clarity, but also at the same time losing clarity and sanity about what is going on. So we're kind of following a character who's maybe losing a bit of touch with reality on the outside world as she's getting more and more pulled into the reality of Area X. Overall, I just thought it was a really interesting read. Lots of interesting things were happening. Sometimes it was a little bit slow, but luckily the book was relatively short, so it didn't feel like it was dragging too much. And I'm definitely eager to continue this series and see what else the author comes up with. The third book I want to recommend is another short one. This is another thriller horror story, and it is also considered a classic. This is The Dumb House by John Burnside. This is a book that is very much outside of what I would usually read. I had heard the synopsis of it and was instantly intrigued by this story. We are following from the point of view of someone that I would say is a psychopath. In this story, as a young boy, he had heard a story from his mother about Akbar and the Dumb House. This was a house where a bunch of infants were placed, and raised by mutes. The children had pretty much everything that they would want to, except access to language. The goal of this experiment was to see if language was inherent or if it was something that needed to be taught. And our main character was really interested to see what the outcome of this experiment was and decides to perform the experiment on his own. He ends up performing this experiment on his two twin children, a son and a daughter, by raising them in the basement and never speaking to them. The majority of this book follows him as he gets to this point. It's not until part 3 that we actually start following the twins and the experiment, but we do know from literally the first sentence that he performs this experiment, considers it a failure, and kills the twins. So throughout this entire story, as we're building towards the ending, we know that it is going to end in the death of these two innocent children. In the beginning, we follow him mostly as a young boy who has kind of a slightly uncomfortable relationship with his mother. She is very much a storyteller, and that's where he learns of Akbar and the dumb house. But she's also a bit of a odd woman, and so he is also picks up on that and becomes a bit of a strange child, and eventually becomes a very cruel person in a way. We watch him as he interacts with different people as he studies up for this experiment and tries to find people to participate in the experiment. He takes advantage of a lot of people who are in vulnerable situations, and he hurts a lot of people who are in vulnerable situations. So this book has a lot of trigger warnings. I would say almost any trigger warning that you could probably think of as far as it comes to thrillers, but it is a short book. So I did do a vlog where I did talk through the trigger warnings a little bit, and I will link that up above. But for now, I won't say anything because it could be considered a bit spoilery to go through all of them. But overall, I thought the writing of this story was really, I would say it's kind of the writing that I would associate with classics. It's a little bit harder to interpret. It's not as straightforward. You can gain a lot more from the writing than what is obviously there. This book deals a lot with language, with life and death. It also deals a lot with science and the rules of experimenting. Obviously, the creepy aspects of it are all throughout this book, but the treatment of those poor children was definitely what disturbed me the most. They were really sweet and innocent, and they didn't really know anything other than the little world around them and each other. And it was just really heart-wrenching to watch their short little lives being spent in this basement with this unloving father figure. So I think it's definitely a hard book to read, but it's also the kind of story that really sticks with you, which is why I would go ahead and recommend this. But definitely look up trigger warnings and make sure that you're, in the right mental space to read something like this. So book number 4, it might seem a little strange that this book is on a recommendation list for me, since I only rated it 2 stars and actually didn't enjoy it that much. But at the same time, I do need to admit that this book really creeped me out and kind of scared me, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. So this is a horror story that follows a group of men who at one point go hunting on a or in an area of the reservation where they're not really allowed, and they ended up killing a bunch of elk, including an elk who had been pregnant. And throughout the story, we see these men getting hunted by the ghost. I don't even know how to describe it. Some sort of spirit humanized version of this elk that they killed, and it's on a revenge rampage. So why I didn't really like this book is at times I thought it was just a little too slow moving, and it also had a bunch of basketball references, which personally I don't care anything about. So I thought that was completely boring to hear about, and I just, felt myself having trouble picking up the book sometime because I was just like, I don't want to read this because it was kind of boring. But I also had to put this book down for a few weeks because my mental health would not allow me to continue reading it because it was giving me so much anxiety because it was that creepy. I would say that the creepiest aspect of the book happened kind of in the first half of it, when we are following a character who starts seeing the dead deer kind of around his house. He had kind of escaped the reservation, but it clearly had followed him, and it was causing him to lose trust in the people around him. And I believe he was the one that had actually killed the elk mother. So I wouldn't say he got the worst of it. I would say the last guy did. The story was very much like nature takes revenge, and it was very much a you take from me and I'm going to take everything from you situation, and there's no escaping this punishment that you deserve for killing an innocent creature kind of situation. So I thought the story was really interesting, and the kind of like deer-headed woman kind of flashing into view, this, kind of half human, half animal creature creeped me out. I personally am never a fan of some sort of human head on an animal body. It always creeps me out. I did really enjoy the ending. I thought it was a really good ending for the story. If you do like kind of a slower moving horror, I would definitely recommend it. It does have quite a bit of gore in it, so heads up on that, but I just didn't quite connect with the majority of the story, but still 10 out of 10 on the creepy factor. So the last book I want to recommend is actually the second book in a duology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this second book, and it shouldn't have any spoilers for the first book because this one takes place a few years after the first one and follows different characters. It's just kind of taking place in the same world, and that is The Shadow Moon by The Shadowed Sun by N.K. Jemisin. The first one is The Killing Moon. Is that what it's called? Yeah, so the first book is called The Killing Moon. And this one I thought was definitely creepier than the first one. This is one of those stories where I felt like a lot of people didn't really like it, and I remember really enjoying it, yet at the same time I can't quite put my finger on what I liked about it, and I also have kind of trouble remembering what the story was about. It's just kind of like one of those stories that I was able to get lost in the moment, and then kind of it drifted away from me. But vaguely, from what I remember, the plot is kind of that there is some sort of creature that is able to go into people's dreams, and it kills them while they are sleeping, and I believe it completely destroys their soul so that they cannot move on to the afterlife. They cease to exist completely, which in its own is a scary concept, to know that you will never be reunited with your loved ones because they do not exist in any way, in any capacity. So that is one of the creepy parts of the story for sure. In this story, we have a organization or a group of people that is able to go into people's dreams and are able to sever the thread from their life and help them move on to the other side. So whatever this creature is, they're assuming that it could possibly be one of those people that has gone rogue or has done something bad to somehow consume their humanity and turn them into some sort of monster. It's hard to talk about the aspects of this book that really made me uncomfortable, that made me angry, that made me sad, that completely and utterly broke my heart, because it is a little bit of a spoiler. But we are dealing with some characters that are trapped in some terrible situations and are experience some incredibly severe abuse. And the monster in this creature in this book is not something that wants to be a monster. And it's something that'll crawl to your feet and beg for death. And I think that's just such a terrible and heartbreaking thing to read about, and to know that what's happening in this fantasy world is an exaggerated version of something that happens in our reality. And as someone who is looking to become a social worker, specifically in foster care, this just really moved me and made me so angry. But at the same time, it's horrifying. It really is horrifying that what happened in this book is what happened. So this is definitely a story that really sticks with me because it was such a disgusting situation. So I mean, one of those situations where trigger warnings might be a little spoilery, but definitely look into them because it can be really upsetting. All right, guys, so not ending on a very happy note, but when you're talking about, you know, books that make you scared, that make you uncomfortable, that make you feel like you need to take a shower because you just feel like it's disgusting, isn't gonna always be the happiest video. But I hope that you found some recommendations to finish off the fall season with, or even to save for next spooky season. Let me know down below what books you read this season that gave you the Eeebee Jeebies, because I'm definitely looking for some more recommendations. And thank you guys, as always, for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!